Hello and welcome to this video. This is a new video in our series here for Reddit opening of the week, battling rare first moves. And we're sort of going from, if we look from the black perspective, from right to left, and we looked at b3 and b4, and now the next move to check is knight to c3. Yeah, this is what happens on the c file. White also might play 1c3, but this is so innocuous. You just play d5, e5, whatever you want. It doesn't really interfere with black at all. So knight c3, this is subject of this video. That move does not have a clear name. It's quite funny. There's a number of names associated with it. The Van Geet opening, the Dunst, the Sleipner, the knight on the left, the Linksspringer in Deutsch. Yeah, all kinds of weird names, let's say not well-known names. Whatever it is, it's not a bad move. The only reason why we don't see this so often is that it is not a very flexible move. White is committing his knight to c3 very early on, and he also tells from move 1 that he's not going to use his c-pawn in the fight for the center. That does only make it not so ambitious, but not bad, because black, whatever he does, will very often likely just transpose to some other opening. Your reply to knight c3 can be very much adjusted to what you play against other openings. For example, if you play the Sicilian against 1e4, then 1c5 is a very decent move, as white barely has anything better than playing e4 now or on one of the next moves. Sometimes they will start with the g3, bishop g2, but it's very logical to play e4 here. So it transposes to some kind of closed Sicilian. If you play, however, 1e5 on e4, so this looks normal, this is in fact a somewhat tricky move. Here white, after knight f3, knight c6, d4, gets some weird version of the Scotch. The pawn is not on e4, and that means that some counterplay is missing that black usually has in the Scotch. Here, for example, after a move like bishop c5, knight f5 is quite interesting. So to make it short, it is not to be recommended to play 1e5 on knight c3. Not that black is in trouble, but you would really need to know some specific to make it work. If you are not averse to 1e4, 1e5 openings, then you can play knight to f6. This is actually my move in this position. What I'm doing here is after e4 play e5, so it's a Vienna game. After d4 play d5, and it's the Veresov opening, which usually arises from 1d4. And besides those two moves, e4 and d4, you have a hard time to find anything that is particularly logical. I mean, you can play, of course, f4 or something like that, but the knight on c3 in a Dutch is kind of weird. Black usually does well by just developing and like c5, knight c6, g6. Normal moves. The knight is just prematurely placed there. Sometimes, of course, just d5, d4 is good, kicking that knight back. So after knight c3, knight f6, very likely we will transpose to some other opening. However, you have to be ready for this. So you should know something about the Vienna, or alternatively, this is some kind of Alekhines defense. Sorry. Knight f6 is a decent choice. So c5 for the Sicilian guys, knight f6 for the e4, e5 players. What else is there? There is my main recommendation. That is knight c3, d5. One side note, if you intend to play with a fianchetto, like you play the modern defense or so, I would be a little bit reluctant to play g6 here, because after h4, it looks a bit wacky, but this is probably going to happen. After h4, that h5 move is kind of annoying, and probably black has to react here somehow with h5, and I'm not sure that you want that. So if you absolutely insist on playing for some g6 based setup, maybe it's better to start with some d6 or so, even though this looks a little bit modest against a move like knight c3, where you can play in the center far more aggressively like d5. So d5, this is my main recommendation. Yeah, this should also fit well with people who not play d5 regularly against d4, let's say. What is white normally doing? The most frequent move here is the move e4, and that will be the final thing to look at. However, we have to also look at other options. In some rare cases, white plays knight to f3, just putting the second knight out. Here, the simple recommendation is to just play knight f6, control e4, and if they play d4 now, which looks very likely, just play for normal development. Bishop to f5, e6, and c5 is the idea. It's some kind of reverse Chigorin, where white has committed very early on to put the knight on f3, which is limiting his options. In the Chigorin, quite often that knight is not moving so early to sometimes use the f-pawn. Knight f3 is very rare though. d4, however, is very valid, and this is leading to the Veresov opening, which is this. This is probably in some kind of somehow in your repertoire anyway, because after 1 d4, if we go back, most people play either d5 or knight f6. This is the vast majority of players. And after d4, knight f6, knight c3, you're pretty much not forced, but yeah, d5 is the most logical move there to prevent e4. So this is just another move order to lead into a position that you very likely have in your repertoire anyway. I felt like I could just easily say, okay, this is the Veresov opening, and we are talking about rare first move, so while I look at this, I felt it's a little bit like cheating, because you pretty much get it by force. So I wanted to give a quick overview what to do against this opening. In fact, it has gotten some kind of momentum in the recent 2-3 years, as Bardo Jobava, the very creative Georgian grandmaster, has played a number of nice games with bishop to f4. Okay, let's start, however, with bishop g5, which is the classical way to play the Veresov opening. What this basically is the Chigorin defense tempo up. Yeah, black is normally playing knight c6 and bishop g4 in the Chigorin, and this is just the same thing, colors reversed. Black, however, has not played the typical queen's gambit move c5 yet. However, this is exactly what I recommend. c5. I think this is probably objectively the best move. Black has a couple of alternatives, like knight bd7, for example, to avoid a double pawn. But if white takes on f6, we can be happy about this. We get the bishop pair and it strengthens our center. Don't worry so much about your pawn structure. This is often a mistake that amateur players make. They have heard or learned in some way, isolated pawns, double pawns. This is all true. You should be aware of your pawn structure, but piece activity is often far more important. And here black is quite happy if white takes on f6. Not that white is worse, but this is strengthening the center, and we have two bishops in the long run. How does that continue here after g takes? White now has a basic decision between playing e3 to support the center or play aggressively with e4. After e3, black will play knight c6. If we start with that, then here white chooses between two moves. He plays queen to h5 or d takes c5. If we have a quick look how it works, if d takes c5, there is e6. Often bishop h5, queen to h5, and black recaptures the pawn. Here this position is sharp, quite clearly. Black, after long castles, maybe queen to e7. There are alternatives, but this looks good. This is a sharp position. It's interesting, but black has two bishops. He will go bishop d7 and castles, and has a good center. So this is a very good starting point to play for a win with black. Yeah, it's imbalanced and an interesting position. Something very similar might happen if white starts with queen to h5. Here, black, however, besides e6, which is a decent move, and probably will transpose, can also take if he likes, like takes, and then something like e6 is also possible. Just solidify the center, put the pieces out here, and go for long castles also. White also can start with the move e3 here. After that, black goes knight c6, and after bishop f6, very likely to happen, after knight f3, black will go for the pin. After this, we might transpose to what we have seen above. However, I've forgotten something. I was a bit quick there. There is also the move e4. I was close to forgetting that one. This is the far more aggressive looking move. Yeah, here black will take on e4, and now white has to do something with his d-pawn. He can advance the pawn or take on c5. Taking on c5 is far more popular and better. After d5, black just goes f5 and keeps his pawn there, and this bishop on g7 will be a fantastic piece. Plus, it's an extra pawn. I mean, white has basically no compensation here. So he will take, and here black has a choice. He can support his pawn, keep it, but allow this, check, which is in fact fine. Check. Something like this is quite nice for black, actually. It's not a problem at all. You just have to be a little bit cautious with your king. That has been moved, but our central pawns here are very, very nice. Still, if you don't want to do that, after d takes, there's also queen to a5. Nothing wrong with that. White will normally continue with something like this. Queen out here to h5. Let's say bishop g7. And now maybe a check. Black can play bishop d7 or knight c6 with a sharp game. Yeah, f5 is possible. Sometimes keep that. Bishop will be strong on g7. So, yeah, I think we can be happy with that. It's not like better for black, but certainly a good, interesting position. So, c5 is my move against the Veresov with bishop g5. And to keep it simple, after bishop f4, I see no reason to refrain from c5 either. There are alternatives, yeah, e6, a6, all kinds of moves, but to keep it simple, why not c5? It makes a lot of sense. First of all, we are not afraid of that move, of course, because we have to check. So this is not a problem at all. However, after white plays e3, and he basically has to, yeah, taking d4, it's looking very unattractive. After e3, and now black trades on d4. Here, in this position, here black has to be a little bit cautious with knight to b5. If black is playing the routine move knight c6, after knight b5 it gets quite embarrassing, as we have no way to cover c7. So here, black, as he wants to play knight c6, should invest one move to play a6. Looks slow, but the position here is basically a Caro-Kann or Caro-Kann. I sometimes have problems with this, with pronouncing German words in English. I should switch to the German pronunciation, which is correct, but it's very tricky for me to do. Somehow I tend to say those German words in some very weird English way, and it sounds pretty wacky. But it's not voluntarily. I have no idea how to get rid of it. Anyway, a6 is a good move. We prevent this, and in the exchange Caro, the knight absolutely does not belong on c3. So we don't really mind to invest that a6 move, which, as I said, as b5 for minority attack can be useful anyway. It doesn't really make or doesn't give black any issues that we have played a6. Yeah, this is my recommendation against the Veresov with bishop f4. I think after these moves, it's not really necessary to know much more. Black intends to play knight c6, possibly pin here, then e6, and it's a very sound, healthy development. I'm actually a little bit puzzled why this line is not played more often against bishop f4, which is, I mean, it's not like very fashionable, but it has been played quite a bit in rapid and blitz chess by strong players, even just to get something different on the board. And I wonder why a6 is not played more. Yeah, so this is the veresov. So if we go back to the initial moves after d5, if they go d4, this is what I'm recommending. Oh, by the way, I actually forgot that there's a blackmar gambit. That takes us a really far away now, if we look at that. While I'm recording the video, I'm getting aware of that possibility. White could play that. Well, I've got something that I can recommend. First of all, there is the opinion that this move order isn't good in the first place due to knight takes e4, which is maybe possible. But if you want a very simple recommendation against this opening, you can take f3. And now it is perfectly okay for black to take the pawn. However, when I was looking at this a little bit, I found out something when I was looking at the Caro-Kann opening, that black actually has the move c6 here, which is very good, actually. Pretty good. The thing is, white now lacks a clear move, what he wants to do, or what he should do. If he takes on e4 with the pawn, we play e5, and this is already very nice for black. Yeah, the capture on e5 is pretty bad.
Check.
Yeah, we get this back and have a good structure with this weak pawn there. Or if white plays knight f3, we capture, and something like knight takes bishop b4 sees white already struggling. Yeah, black has excellent development, e4 is weak, and yeah, it's very difficult for white to even keep a playable position here. Yeah, you can take with the queen. Okay, that's possible. But after this, and let's say knight d7 intending knight e5, black is also very comfortable. And this is absolutely not a position that a blackmar gambit fan would like to play. So f takes e4 is pretty, yeah, it's not really great. What else is there? If they, I'm sorry for my quote here, if they develop their bishop, this one, something like this, for example, is bad due to knight d5 simply. It doesn't do him any good. Or bishop g5, you can just go h6 if you like. Yeah, be happy to return the pawn. I mean, this kind of position is good for black because we have good dark square play. So what do they do? Sometimes they play this move, and here black is happy to play b5. This is just a very decent way to play, like this. And how is it continuing? I'm kind of making this up as I'm going along because I looked at this like 2 years ago. b5, bishop b3. I think e6 is the move because again now white has some problems finding moves here. Something like this will give away the e4 pawn. And there is really no compensation there. There's been a game by Nigel Short with white against Bereyev, if I'm not mistaken, where black was very comfortable out of the opening. So, okay, this is a bit improvised, but if you want something against the blackmar, this is a pretty good line, that c6, just decline it. I looked at this out of the Caro-Kann opening, or Caro-Kann. If you wonder how that came about, it was this line. And then I found out that knight f6 is a pretty decent move that transposes to what we just looked at. Okay, so back to back to one knight c3. Okay, d5, and what you will get there quite often is to move e4. Yeah, this is a way of making this in some cases an independent opening. If here you are familiar with the again Caro-Kann c6 or the French defense e6, you can easily just transpose to that. Yeah, this is something that's possible, or knight f6 for some kind of elegance defense. Or you can also take, and after knight takes, play something Scandinavian style, like queen d5, for example. All those moves are possible, but they don't really try to exploit what white is doing. And I think that this is possible. Not that black is much better, but I think it's quite clear that after d4, it is white who's probably fighting for equality. The knight is attacked. Sometimes they go back to b1. That doesn't look very, very active, but it's not such a bad move, actually. I think after e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d3, and now just normal development, bishop d6. Black must be fine. I mean, knight c3 and back cannot be great, but it doesn't look like white is in huge trouble. Yeah, some possible plan here can be to try to exchange that bishop. It's the only really active looking piece, and other than that, try to expand on the queen side, as this is the side where we have the space advantage. Knight b1 is very rare though. They normally go here. Yeah, and other moves are really bad. Yeah, I mean, who goes to d5? There are actually some games that I found with the move, but it is just quite weird. Something like e5, it's already threatening c6, and well, yeah, where do you go? Knight e2 is the move. Now e5, the move order here is important. If they play knight f3 now, normally knight g3 is played, but this is also possible. We play f6. This is the important move to remember. We don't play the knight out to c6 to allow a possible pin with a later bishop b5. f6 first. The idea is that after knight g3, which is transposing to knight g3 on move 4, we play bishop to e6. And here the bishop c4 move is just prevented. We are just in time to do that. And this means that white has some issues with this development of that bishop. We will explore this position a little bit more when we look at knight g3. Yeah, here white also can choose an entirely different way of development with d3, keeping that bishop back here and foreshadowing it. I think the easiest is to just play c5, and after f4, knight c6, knight f3, to support this e5 pawn with pieces. The most likely scenario is something like this, like g3, and now my recommendation is to play something with f6, like f6, bishop g2, knight g7, this kind of thing. This is some kind of King's Indian reversed, where we have this typical play. Yeah? White has kingside prospects with some f5, and black has the better play on the queen side. What is important is black has not castled yet, not castled short, and I think that in many cases here black can do without castling and keep the king a little bit in the center, trying to play on the queen side without getting without giving white a clear target on the king side. This is often quite irritating for the white player who wants to go for that kingside play against the black king. So this is definitely a good, interesting position and playable. Knight g3 is the most common move, and here we have this important finesse, yeah, to make sure that the bishop is not coming there. Here knight f3 looks very logical, and f6. Yeah, now this is a little bit of a problem now for white. How does he develop his bishop to some active square? I mean, okay, you can play a bishop e2, castles, and so on, but black is very happy, I think, with this space. Something like c5, castles, knight c6. This is just black being white in a way. You have a typical position that the white player has with more space and an easy game, let's say. White is basically suffering from this disadvantage in space a little bit. It's not terribly bad, but it's not very attractive either. What white sometimes tries is the move c3 to attack that center. Here black has an interesting choice. You can play the routine, let's say c5, which is very, very easy to play, and just develop. like check. We go here, later a6, and then the knight e7 comes to c6. This is very okay and playable. Or you can play the more ambitious move d3. This can lead to some wacky positions if white tries to do things here like knight h4, and it's very, very tough. It's something like c5, white can check, knight c6, queen b5. All of a sudden we see 2 pawns hanging, but well, is that a good position for white? I doubt it. But it's still kind of messy. You have to kind of be up for that. That if you play d3, you're probably in good shape, but it leads to messy positions. But c5 is also simple and good. Sometimes white players try that, the check here to get the bishop around here. But we also don't mind this so much. A normal move like knight to a6 or knight to d7 is okay for black here. Something like this, for example. If they go here, we can take and just develop here. Or if you go to a6, there's this additional option after bishop b3 to take and play d3. It's also interesting, trying to make this a very bad piece. An alternative here is also the move h5. This is a motif that you should keep in mind. It can be handy quite often because the knight on g3 doesn't have clearly good squares to go to. For example, after bishop b3, black can take and push even further with h4. And here knight f5, h3 can be quite a mess, but probably a mess where black is in pretty good shape. So knight c3. This is not a bad move at all. It just has relatively little independent value. The independent lines are normally not particularly great. If we go back to here, we had a look at d4 and e4, and other moves, frankly speaking, don't make much sense. We looked at f4 briefly, where black can just develop. Even d4 is a good move. The knight is just not good there in connection with f4. Or white can, of course, play like g3, but again, after this, white is going back. That cannot be great. So mostly after d5, they play e4 or d4. e4 is the more frequent move. And then we get to the lines that we have looked at in this video. I hope you liked the overview. You don't need to be scared of knight c3, but if you want to play ambitiously, that d5, d4, for example, after e4 and d4 can be a very good way to go. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.